Hi, I'm KJ and welcome to my podcast, Not a Life Coach. This podcast is an account of my own experience of working a program on a journey to get to know and understand myself better in the search of serenity and being a person I'm proud of. By sharing my experience, I'm hoping to consolidate my own learning as well as being useful to others. Take what you like and leave the rest, and we'll see how this goes. This episode focuses on self-worth. When I first came to this topic, I was very curious as to what I'd find, as I wasn't even sure I understood what self-worth was. Before I started this journey, I certainly knew that I felt worthless and definitely not good enough a lot of the time, and this was something I was desperate to overcome. The realisations I had on this topic and the understanding I gained were well beyond anything I could have imagined. I always like to add a small disclaimer at the start of each of these episodes to remind anyone listening that this is just an account of my experience, of my journey. Anyone else's will look different. Please ensure you take time for self-care after thinking about any experiences that bring up lots of difficult emotions. Funnily enough, it was this topic that made it clear to me why this is so important. Self-worth is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a feeling of confidence in yourself that you're a good and useful person. I've learned that if we live with guilt and shame for many years, we start to doubt our ability to be able to do anything right, and self-hatred creeps in. We begin seeking approval from others, and our opinions of ourselves begin to rely on the viewpoint of other people, until all you see is the negative and fail to notice anything positive. For me, this took me to some very dark places where I couldn't see any point in life. I've endured and allowed many abusive relationships of all kinds in my life, and it took me a long time to even understand what this was, let alone how to deal with it. I had no idea what a boundary was. I heard people talking about them all the time, but I didn't have the first clue as to what they were or how to implement them. I thought having high standards in life was the key to success, and was utterly blind as to how they affected my outlook, affected my relationships, and put me under so much unnecessary stress and pressure. By following this framework of questions, I uncovered so much about myself and how to begin the process of making change. I say begin because I certainly have not mastered any of this yet. I remind myself regularly in one of my favourite slogans for life: progress, not perfection. The framework for this topic started with questions on how we treat ourselves, starting with what I do to take care of myself physically. Whilst I make an effort to watch my weight, I have to admit I do absolutely no exercise at all, despite my aching body telling me I need to do so. I have unhealthy habits, and despite trying to make healthier choices, they often do not last long. This got me thinking why I do this and how differently I'd advise others, and maybe I should be listening to my own advice a little bit more. Next, asked how I ensure I eat the right foods and get enough rest. I definitely do not get enough rest. I know this every time the alarm clock goes off in the morning, and I promise myself I'll get to bed earlier the next night, but I rarely do. I have a very sweet tooth and I eat lots of unhealthy food, and I definitely do not drink enough water every day. So watching my weight mainly consists of skipping meals if I've overeaten calories on unhealthy foods and snacks. It started to make me think about how I am not helping myself. On a bad day, I'm not only tired, but I will either eat very little or only eat sugary stuff. And there's plenty of research to show that this only brings you down further. Again, I'm holding myself back. This is still something I'm working on, but thinking about this has made me more aware of the nutrition I need. I try not to have junk food in the house anymore, and if I'm having a bad day and I'm struggling to eat, I've got myself a stock of meal replacement shakes. I have a bedtime alarm on my phone and now use a sleep app to show me how much sleep I am, or am not, getting. The last time I went through a difficult period, the shakes were an absolute lifesaver. I really felt the difference of having something nutritious and made the decision to sleep rather than sit up late, doom scrolling on my phone or dwelling on my problems. The next day, I felt so much stronger and ready to face the world and overcome the current situation. Just being aware made that tiny shift in my thought patterns to remind myself how I can help myself. The next step is consistency with this. It's so easy to slip back into old behaviours, but I must remember, progress, not perfection. Next was a question on when I last went to the doctors or the dentist. I laughed at this. It has been a long time. My doctors must love me because I never bother them. Something needs to be really wrong for me to grace them with my presence. For some reason, I used to feel proud about that. Honestly, I still can't explain why I thought that was a good thing. Every time I come back to this section, I book a dentist appointment. I think it's fear of having something wrong that I don't want to face. Good old denial, my old friend. But it's also a lack of caring about myself. I'd never put off going to the doctors if it was my kids, and I book them regular dentist appointments. So why don't I do the same for myself? Next, it asked about what I am doing to exercise my mind. Well, here I could finally find a positive. I get bored easily and have a very busy mind that needs constant stimulation. I love studying, and although I do not miss the intensity of studying for a degree while working and having babies, I do miss the learning process. I have an app that I learn languages on, and I manage to ensure that I take 10 minutes every day for that, and I currently have a 1,300-day streak. I'm proud of that. I work in an environment that changes regularly, and I have to keep on top of some complex daily changes, and I love doing free short courses when I find ones that appeal. Doing this helps me to feel proud of myself and reminds me to try to keep these things up and set those healthy habits. The next question asked about how I take compliments. This was very interesting, as it made me realise I do not take them well at all. It makes me feel really awkward. I do like being recognised, and I certainly moan if I'm not recognised. But I will always try to deflect any kind of compliment, be it about an item of clothing or an achievement or whatever. I'll play it down. I'll just explain, oh, it's just a bargain from eBay, or I could only do that because of such and such. I've been doing a lot of reading up on this since beginning to really think about it. And from what I've read, it comes down to so many things. The main culprits that I related to were a fear of appearing conceited or a fear of being seen to be proud. This I do. I worry what others think of me, and this is something that came up in the last topic and something I continue to work on. Doubting the sincerity of the compliment. I definitely do this. Sometimes my first thought can be, will I have to give something in return? And will I be indebted in some way? Or are there any ulterior motives? The next was low self-esteem. I'd never really considered this before and started to look that up. I'm still looking into that and I'm still thinking about it. I feel like I swing between high and low self-esteem depending on where I am and who I'm with. The final one was a negative self-view. Funnily enough, when I discussed this through with my sponsor, she pointed this out to me as well. In each section, after I'd listed all my negatives, she kept reminding me of positives about myself and that I'd forgotten to add them in as well. I'm still not sure why this is, and funnily enough, I'm not a life coach, but hopefully this will become clear to me and I can start being a little kinder to myself. For now, it really helps to think it through and talk about these things with someone I trust. From this, I also now realise that by downplaying somebody's compliment, I'm rejecting their view in that moment. Or if I downplay something I'm being praised for by dismissing the recognition of what I've achieved or attributing it to something else or making a negative comment about how I could have done it better, I'm actually giving the message that other people don't know what a good job is and therefore would never live up to my own high standards of perfection. It was then that I realised, and I had like these flash memories of people being worried about telling me some of the things that they've achieved for fear that I would judge them harshly as my standards are so high. Or I've seen that behaviour breeds and everyone begins to downplay their achievements. It suddenly clicked why people used to tell me that I had high standards or too high a standard, and I could never understand what that meant exactly. But now I'm starting to see things from a very different perspective, and I aim to be more aware of this and address it as it happens, if I can. In fact, while I've been writing this episode this week, I was praised at an all-staff meeting for a really successful project I've been running. I know how hard I've worked and the time and effort I've put in, and I'm so proud that I've done such a good job. Yet I found being praised absolutely excruciating. I went bright red, got hot and sweaty, and my first response wanted to just play it all down and attribute it to something else. But instead, I took a breath and recognised my thought patterns, and my response instead was just a simple "thank you very much." But it was still emotionally painful, which is just absolutely ridiculous. But I feel this is progress, and I know one day it won't feel like this anymore. The next section was on safety. The first bit questioned how I can know and prevent others from abusing me physically, mentally or emotionally. Now this is something I've been working on for a long time. I recognise now the key for me is about being aware of my own emotions and how I'm feeling in that moment when something happens that makes me feel uncomfortable. I try to reflect internally and think about whether something is my own trigger or if something in that situation is not right. And if I feel hurt and annoyed, my first sign is my heartbeat rising. I can recognise that now and walk away or just excuse myself from the situation to take some time to think things over. If it's an escalated situation, I can now calmly say that I think somebody's behaviour is unacceptable and I don't have to accept that. And instead, we can speak again at a later time when everybody is calm. I have learned time and time again that by reacting, I make things so much worse. I end up doing things that I'm not proud of, and I add to an already terrible situation. Talking this one through highlighted by doing this, I'm actually setting boundaries. I've started to learn how to do that without even realising. I can set boundaries of what is and is not acceptable to me. I'm allowed to walk away and not accept unacceptable behaviour, and knowing this has been really liberating. I've started to acknowledge and express when I feel uncomfortable. It's also made me realise it's okay to detach from people who overstep my boundaries on a constant basis, and that it is safe to allow people to walk away from me. I want to be surrounded by people who support and nourish me, and I can do that by being with the people who make me feel good and who I have a really good time with. But again, I'm not perfect, and I do react sometimes when I shouldn't, but I can remind myself I am human. I can recognise my own wrongdoings forgivably and apologise promptly when I'm in the wrong. The next section was on being lovable. It asked several questions on what I like about myself and what others like about me. It felt really good to make a positive list. I do seem to have a gift of making people feel better, and there are things that I like about myself. Maybe I should be reminding myself of these things more often. The last questions in this section looked at deriving satisfaction from working to improve myself. And this really got me reflecting on how far I have come in 4 years, how my life has absolutely transformed in so many aspects. I've worked so hard and achieved a lot in the past 4 years, and working on myself allows me to look at the bigger picture and see things in a much more positive light. The next part was about my own standards. I knew I was getting the hang of this as I'd covered so much on this already, so this next section just naturally followed. It asked me about times I'd felt confident, times I'd stayed calm in an outburst, and situations where I'd managed to remember that accusations being made against me were not the facts. It asked if I know what my limitations are and do I accept them, and then the times that I felt proud of myself. It's making me aware that I do have positives. It also made me think about how many of my standards are my own and how often I put so much pressure on myself. I thought of so many examples of when I've done this. Sometimes it's worked to my benefit, but a lot of the times it has been to my detriment. It confirms my earlier thinking. I really need to be a bit kinder to myself and recognise that a good enough job is still a good job. The final section was on checking myself. It asked who I rely on to fulfil my emotional needs and how that's working. Now, this is something I've thought about many times over the years. I learnt a long time ago how as humans in a modern world, we sometimes expect one individual to fulfil all the needs that a village used to. It's so easy to get upset and blame someone else when they let me down or don't fulfil the need I was expecting. But this doesn't get me anywhere. I recognise that now. I am responsible for taking care of my needs, and I have a lot of wonderful people around me that I can reach out to when I'm in need. They can support me, but they are not responsible for helping me or making me feel better. The following questions ask me to look at what stops me doing the things I want to do. what I do and do not like about my physical appearance, and how my perspective towards my self-worth affects my family. Now, this one did get me thinking about the behaviour I model to my children, and this is really important to me. If I don't like myself and appreciate myself, why on earth would they? And will they feel the same about themselves? After the first time I studied this, I talked this over with my kids, full of the guilt of the negative behaviours I may have passed on. But I managed to have an open conversation with them, just to get them thinking, and I continue to do this. I certainly do not have all the answers, but I usually find talking and initiating thinking about these things starts the process of change. Finally, asked about if I spend time alone and how I feel about that and what I do. 4 years ago, I would have replied that I hated being by myself. It meant being alone with my head and my thoughts, and I couldn't bear that. Now, after a natural process, I love time alone. I'm not saying I've turned into a hermit, but I really do appreciate being by myself to do the things I want to do. For me, that often involves writing. I do seem to have a knack for it, and for me, I find journaling incredibly helpful to reflect on what's happening in the present moment. I also have a terrible memory, and it's really good to have something to reference back to. But I also enjoy doing absolutely nothing sometimes. And I'm learning that not only is this okay, but it is absolutely vital sometimes. Thinking through these questions, I've learned I easily neglect myself, and I am worth more. I have a lot to be proud of and a right to be happy, and I deserve healthier and better choices. But only I am responsible for this. I need to take my own advice and treat myself like I am my own best friend, and I aspire to remember this. By examining my thoughts as an act of self-love and not as a critical reflection that I use as a weapon against myself, I can begin to accept who I am as I am, recognise my shortcomings and strive to be a better, more understanding and compassionate human being, not only with others, but importantly with myself. I can recognise and value my talents, feelings and achievements and live each day to the full. I'll remind myself of this every time I say, progress, not perfection. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was useful for you. I must also credit the music by Les FM from Ukraine and my amazing team who have helped me to create this. If you found this podcast useful, please like and subscribe and join me in the next episode.